Glad you could join us here on Oneberg, on our Oneberg Facebook channel, Oneberg YouTube, or maybe you're listening back on our Spotify channel. Well, joining me this week, we welcome back into the podcast our good friend Dawn Rebel from the TribLive High School Sports Network. Dawn, I should say good afternoon. It's now after 12, so no more of that good morning stuff. Good afternoon to you.
Yeah, I didn't know if this was like the West Coast podcast and it was morning. That's fine. Good afternoon to you, Edward.
You never know. We have had people listening from Steelers Australia, Steelers Mexico, all over the place. Steeler Nation represented well here on Oneberg each and every week. That's for sure. So we could be in another time zone somewhere.
Dude, let me add. I've been wanting to say this. You bring up Steeler fans everywhere, and that's a phenomenon that started with, of course, all the great teams of the '70s, and the fact that sadly our region was hit hard economically at that time, and a lot of folks went elsewhere, but took their Steeler fandom with them. We refer to it as Steeler Nation. And when I hear other teams also use that nation moniker, it's not an I thing. It cracks me up because every road game, the Steelers prove the strength of Steeler Nation. And outside of a select few, Dallas, Green Bay, and I'm sure now Kansas City, you don't see that allegiance traveling or just in those areas taking over stadiums, literally,
Right.
which we might see again on Sunday. So it truly is Steeler Nation. And, all these other, like I heard somebody say, Panther Nation is not happy with their football team. I'm like, Panther Nation? They don't even care about that team in Carolina.
Panther Nation. There's Bucco Nation too. We should maybe talk about the Bucks here in a little bit. They've had an interesting week, that's for sure. But let's talk Steelers and piggyback off of that, Dawn, and Steeler Nation. The Pittsburgh Steelers 3-0 after the first 3 weeks of the season, coming off a 20-10 victory against the Chargers. They go to Indianapolis this upcoming Sunday at 1:00 to take on the 1-2 Colts. So far, so good for Steeler Nation and the black and gold. They're off to a great start, and a lot of it has to do with the quarterback play of Justin Fields.
Yeah, he has done exactly what they have wanted him to do. They have not asked a whole lot. I've heard people kind of complaining that, especially this past week against the Chargers, he didn't really look to run. And I think with the fact that Russell Wilson's on the shelf, that's probably a mandate by the coaching staff to Justin to sort of, try to do your thing, throw in the football instead of running with it. The people that say this is the same offense we've seen the last few years really don't know what they're talking about, because even though it's still low scoring, I think because of the way their defense is playing and some of the opponents were playing, they have been very conservative offensively. But I think that if they need to, if they get into a situation where they're down in the second half and need to open it up, I think they will, whether it's Wilson or Fields at quarterback. Fields he's been a gem to this point in what they've asked him to do. Probably can do a little more if he is asked to do a little more. And, the offense is doing what it needs to. Don't turn the ball over and put it in the defense's hands. And the defense has been tremendous.
Yeah, the defense so far through the first 3 games of the season, averaging just under 300 yards per game. They've gotten some big-time play out of the new guys that have come into this defense, Deshaun Elliott being one of them at the safety position that they picked up from Dallas. Dante Jackson, who came via the trade with Deontay Johnson, has played well, opposite corner of Joey Porter Jr. Minka still is Minka. And then Cam Hayward, who they signed, right before the start of the season, gave him that extension. There were some questions out there about, his age and if he was going to be still productive. Through 3 games, he's been tremendous on that defensive line. And, of course, T.J. Watt continues to be T.J. Watt.
I mean, we've heard critically about how much that side of the ball gets paid over the last few years since TJ and Minka signed their big contracts. But man, oh man, they are getting the job done in spades here this season. And I think part of it is you mentioned a couple of the newcomers. Uh, they have just added so much speed to the second and third levels of their defense. We know what we have up front. We have a bunch of big bodies. It's tough to run against, and we've seen that. Both LA and Atlanta are two very good running teams. Weren't able to get the job done. We're going to see another test coming up on Sunday, but we know what we have, something very special with the outside linebackers. So the pass rush is going to be there, but the speed and the tackling. I mean, a lot of short stuff from what we've seen of opposing quarterbacks over the last few weeks, and none of those. We're not seeing the Miller big first down that led to the Fields touchdown last week. He would have been short of the sticks. Breaks the tackle, gets the first down. I think the next play, Fields scores. We're seeing good tackling by the corners, by the safeties, by the linebackers, and it's not a whole lot of yak yards thus far from this defense.
They are the number one defense in the NFL currently across the board. Points per game given up, total yards, as we mentioned. And then from a sack production standpoint, TJ Watt, 3 sacks through the first 3 games of the regular season. Cam Hayward, Adams, and Alex Highsmith, along with Elandro Roberts, each with a sack. But Nick Herbig, 2 sacks this past Sunday. He's now second on the team right behind TJ Watt. I mentioned it on our post-game Steelers show with Brian on Sunday, Dawn, that if you think Pittsburgh possibly has a quarterback controversy, I think they have an outside linebacker controversy, opposite side of TJ Watt. Nick Herbig, I think, should be the starter over Alex Smith once Alex Smith is healthy. And it's Alex Smith, Highsmith, who keeps rotating in with Herbig. Herbig's been impressive so far.
He has. He's the real deal, and he'll get his chance. I think I told you last time I was on, the time is not now. When healthy, Watt and Highsmith are elite. One of the things Highsmith does that might not get a lot of attention, he's so strong against the run. We'll see if how Herbig does against the run, because he's going to be challenged in that aspect coming up on Sunday. The one thing, and they have found ways, we've seen TJ Watt come out at times in games when the long drives are happening. This defense hasn't allowed that yet. But, you're going to face better teams, better quarterbacks. You're going to have teams moving the football. And those 2 starters are going to need a break. Herbig is perfect in that role. The other thing that sort of hurts with Herbig now starting, he's like a prime special teams player. And the special teams thus far, knock on wood, it's been strong. We expected it to be strong, and even though we lose our All-Pro punter on opening day, Waitman's done a great job. It has still been strong, but losing now, Herbig's not going to be playing special teams because he's the starting outside linebacker. Leal moves up to the number 3 guy now, and he might get some playing time, a lot more playing time too, if Herbig struggles against the run, because that's a strength for Leal. So they have a lot of good moving pieces. They have a lot of good depth, but you don't want to keep challenging that depth. If Highsmith's out for a week or 2, that's fine. But I'm not ready to Herbig is good, and he's the real deal. But I'm not sure. Let's just wait as far as, you got 2 studs. Let him continue to learn behind them. And he'll get his time, just, rotating and keeping everybody fresh.
Dawn, let's circle back around to the offense. We talked briefly at the top of the show about Justin Fields through 3 games. Let me give you some statistics. 55 of 75 for 73% completion percentage, 518 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Let's go ahead and ask you the burning question in Pittsburgh each and every day, each and every week. If Russell Wilson is healthy, who's your starting quarterback?
He's not right now. So, and I know that the media's job is to try to get an answer. Kudos to Coach Tomlin for right now. The point is moot because Wilson is not healthy. I think that when that time comes, and it may come sooner than later, I think Wilson is your starting quarterback. I think you've learned a lot from what we've seen in Fields, and you have no problem going to Fields. There will always be Fields packages ready to go when needed, even when Wilson is playing on a regular basis. And I think that we may have found our quarterback of the future, but you brought Russell Wilson in here to start. What little time he has had healthy, unfortunately, he has looked good. He looked good in Latrobe. He looked good in the 2 drives I think he played in preseason. So, and I think he gives a little more stability to the passing game. They've been conservative for a reason with Fields. And again, that's not a knock. He has done everything they've asked him to do. And he is capable of doing more. But I think when healthy, Wilson is your starter. And then you know what you have behind him. So if things aren't working out, you can always make that change.
Interesting, Don. We had Dale Lally on last week from the Steelers Audio Network, and Dale said the exact same thing you said, and that was before the performance that Fields had this past Sunday. So, again, those closest to the team that cover this team day in and day out all seem to have the same feedback that it's going to be Russell Wilson once he's healthy. Mike Tomlin, given the fact that he hasn't come out and said Fields is our guy regardless, also I think welcomes that opinion as well, that it's going to be Russ Wilson once he is healthy and ready to go.
Yeah, I don't know why he would, if the plan is to go to Wilson, you don't say Fields is my starting quarterback. But even if that changes, say Wilson's not healthy for another 3 weeks, and Fields continues to put impressive game after impressive game after impressive game, that might change. By the time Wilson's really 100% ready to go, let's say that's 3 weeks from now, and Fields has played 3 more strong games, that answer may change then. But, I mean, as of right now, I think that's the situation it is, and it's in a good situation to be in, right?
Absolutely. Good problem to have when you have 2, very good quarterbacks to choose from. At least you hope you have it with Russell Wilson. We've yet to see him in the regular season, but as you said, good offseason, good camp, all indication points to, Russ, when healthy, will be just okay at that quarterback position. Other offensive numbers too, Don. Najee Harris, 55 carries, 209 yards, no touchdowns. George Pickens, the leading receiver so far, 13 catches, 171 yards, no touchdowns. Don, your thoughts about the running game and the passing game with those two outside of what we just talked about with Fields? There was a lot going in and, leading up to the start of the regular season at the wide receiver position. Were they going to trade and try to get Brandon Ayuk? Of course, that fell through, didn't happen. But outside of Pickens, we haven't seen too much else action. Austin stepped up this past week. Calvin Austin had a good game against the Chargers. But outside of that receiver room's been light so far.
Yeah, I mean, we really haven't seen much from Van. I know there's some folks that were touting Van Jefferson as a 2. And I've said all along, I think he's a 3. I think Miller and Austin give you good depth at the position. They have played strong. They have, again, done everything that they've been asked to do. But they're good pieces. I think that within the next 4 or 5 weeks, it's not going to happen like over the next couple weeks. But when you see teams that start to fall out of it, and you, as Omar Khan, can go maybe, get another elite receiver, not a number 1 guy. You got that in Pickens. But I think that's one of my biggest concerns. They still do not have a strong number 2. And if there's a lot of guys out there that play for bad teams that would be a perfect fit and might not cost you a whole lot as far as draft capital. The running game, the Warren injury still is concerning. They were a perfect partnership over the last couple of years. Now Harris is doing a brunt of the heavy lifting. I know he's got a sore arm, but he'll play, and again he'll get a majority of the carries. He's having a fabulous season. So Patterson is a nice option to take some carries off of Harris while Warren is out. But man, it would be nice to get Warren in there, and no need to rush him either, right? I think he's got a hamstring issue. Let that thing heal, because that can be a nagging injury all year. Let it heal. They got 3 wins under their belt. They're in pretty good shape. So do what you need to do to get Warren right. But at the same time, you don't want to have the wheels come off of Harris, because he's having a marvelous season.
Let's talk offensive line, Don, while we're talking about the offense as well. Troy Fautanu, the Steelers' first-round draft pick from this past season, I should say, this past spring draft, out. Going to be out for the rest of the season. Got banged up in camp, came back. All indications when he was healthy that he was going to be the man, and was actually outplaying everyone on that offensive line. But unfortunately for Fautanu and the Steelers, he's out for the year. Broderick Jones, last year's first-round draft pick, struggled in camp, struggled the first couple games of this season, struggled at the start of the Chargers game, but then he rebounded quickly. You didn't hear Jones's name the rest of that game after the first couple series, and that's always a good thing when you talk offensive linemen, because the only time you usually hear about them is on a penalty or they miss a block. So Jones kind of rebounded. Zach Frazier's been phenomenal at the center position, and all indications are they're going to get Isaac Salomalu back this week.
That has been sort of underrated in this start, is that if you had to pick, their offensive line has avoided injury the last couple of years, not so much this year. But, everyone's excited. Young talent, high upside talent. And yet, if you had to pick a player, Salomalu is probably what you would say is their best lineman. And they've been able to get off to this 3-0 start without him. Him coming back would be huge. And that's not a knock on Anderson or, as we saw last week, McCormick. I think they've done a nice job. But Salomalu, I mean, he's a beast. It's a grouping that's, improving little by little. They had some rough spots the first couple of weeks, even last week, but I think that's a very, very good Los Angeles Charger defense they went up against. But they're starting. I thought they were a lot of times on their heels early in the season, a little disjointed, and that makes sense because they haven't had a whole lot of time to gel together with all the injuries that they've had up front. You said it, Jones. We didn't hear his name. That's a good thing when you're an offensive lineman. Frazier's a beast early on in his career. So all the optimism and excitement for this offensive line, I think, is going to continue to grow. I think they're going to continue to get better. They haven't been a dominant force yet, but with Salomalu back, hopefully for the long term, and Jones and Moore, the bookends, they were their tackles all last year. You hate to see the injury to the number one pick, but I think they're in good shape, and they have now proven depth with Anderson, who could play various positions, and also McCormick getting a taste of life in the NFL. So pretty good shape. That's a grouping that can only get better.
Yeah, Mason McCormick, you mentioned him. He was a late-round draft pick this past season. They really liked him to possibly play center, but then they were able to get Zach Frazier, and Mason McCormick was still there late, so they snagged him as well. He had a good game on Sunday as well, the rookie. And you mentioned it. What a young offensive line and what a bright future up front the Steelers really have as they've invested heavily in that offensive line the last two drafts. We are talking to Don Rebel of the TribLive High School Sports Network. Glad you could join us here on the Three Rivers podcast, here on Oneberg, on our Facebook channel, our YouTube channel, or maybe you're listening back on Spotify. And Don, we're going to talk high school football here in a little bit. But before we do that, let's touch on the AFC North while we wrap up our Steeler talk here. The AFC North really benefiting the Steelers so far through the first three games. That 3-0 start has also been sidecard with the Ravens starting out 1-2, who almost gave up a huge lead in Dallas, came down to the wire on that one. The Ravens eke out that victory late in the fourth quarter. They're 1-2 on the season. The Browns went back to being the Browns after they upset Jacksonville the previous week. They're now 1-2. And then the Cincinnati Bengals, or the Bungles as we like to call them, 0-3. The Washington Commanders go in on Monday Night Football at Cincinnati, beat the Bengals. Right now, the Steelers have a 3-game lead on the Bengals and a 2-game lead on the Ravens and Browns.
Yeah, it looks good now. It really does. And that's good because remember, everybody was talking about, the death march at the end of the Steelers schedule, how difficult the end of the Steelers schedule is. So this great start is needed. And the fact that these other teams in the AFC North are stubbing their toes, hey, that's A-okay by me. I can't imagine. I think Cleveland and Cincinnati got some big time problems. I know that Cleveland's banged up. Deshaun Watson is a shell of his former self. I mean, at what point? I know the contractual situation and obligations they have with him, but at what point do you? I mean, I think sooner than later, Jameis Winston gets the call because they need something. They need some sort of spark, or else it's going to be a long season. Cincinnati 0-3 and 2 losses at home to New England and Washington. Kind of unexplainable, to be honest with you. They had some contract issues that really never got settled. I think that there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Chase holding out as long as he did. Hendrickson and Higgins not happy with their contract status. So any sort of injury, don't expect them to give it the to go out there hobbled, if you will, in a contract season. So I expect them to turn it around. I think Joe Burrow is too good. They don't have a rugged schedule, although, again, they've lost to 2 teams they should have beat. I think they'll turn it around, maybe not contend for the division title, but they'll be in the hunt for a wild card. Baltimore, such a huge win. Yeah, they almost kissed it away at Dallas. But they were coming off that mind-numbing loss to the Raiders 2 weeks ago. They got a tough one Sunday night home against Buffalo, a Buffalo team that has stunned me. I thought they were going to take a big step back this year, but right. They look like really them in Kansas City. They look like really the best team right now, Buffalo, in the National Football League. We'll see. I think that Baltimore-Buffalo game will tell a lot as far as Baltimore. Is that a team that can come back after this slow start and still be in the hunt for a division title?
The Steelers at the Colts Sunday at 1:00. Brian and I will have the Steeler post-game show afterwards where we'll break down the Steelers Week 4 game at Indianapolis. So make sure you stay logged on here to Oneberg. Dawn, let's switch gears and go to your bread and butter. You can catch Dawn Rebel and a cast of thousands each week on the TribLive High School Sports Network. And Dawn, we actually do a preview show, WPIL preview show on Friday nights live from the game that I'm broadcasting for you guys. And we bring on whoever's doing the game with me. So I'll have Sean Saputo and Greg Smith on with me this week at 6 o'clock from Bethel Park High School as we get ready for Moon in Bethel Park. And we always talk about all the great games that are on TribLive HSSN each and every Friday night.
Beautiful Bethel Park, right?
Beautiful Bethel Park, home of the Blackhawks. But we're halfway through the season. Hard to believe. It is week 5 of the WPIL high school football season. Week 0, a lot of teams played. We talked about that last time you were on. So really, this is the 6th game of the season for a lot of high school football teams. Let's go through each classification. I got the latest TribLive HSSN top 5 rankings. and let's get your thoughts on what you think in each classification, who you think the favorite's going to be, or if there's a surprise team on the horizon through the second half of the season. We'll start at the bottom and work our way up to 6A. So we'll start in 1A. Pretty cut and dry here. Fort Cherry 5-0. Matt Sieg is healthy, getting healthier from what I hear. They are the number one team in Class 1A. Clarendon 5-0. The Bears have rebounded this year after a couple down years, doing very well so far, still undefeated. Southside 4-0. Bishop Canevin 3-1, and the Shannock 4-1 on the season so far. Your thoughts on 1A?
I think outside of Class 5A, Class 1A has the most depth. All of those teams that you just mentioned could end up hoisting gold. Had a chance. We had Matt Sieg as our player of the week. Had him on my podcast, Rebel Yell podcast. What a tremendous young man. Finally got the cast off his broken thumb. He was able to finally start throwing the ball again this past Friday. Big win over a good Monessen team on the road. So they're going to be hard to beat, but they still have Cornell and Bishop Canevin to hurdle in their conference. Clareton appears to be the beast of the East and perhaps of the entire classification, although Leechburg, very impressive in knocking off Jeanette last week. Jefferson Morgan is a great story. The Rockets, off to a 5-0 start, one of three teams in their conference to be undefeated at 2-0 thus far. That's a program that is really, you have to go back decades to find the last time they were significant. Right. So that's always good. And you mentioned the Shannock, throw in Southside, the runner-up a year ago in Class A from the Big Seven Conference. A lot of depth. The postseason in Class A, which usually was Clareton and everybody else back in the day, is really a postseason that I'm really looking forward to.
Class 2A, Seton LaSalle, the Rebels, 4-0 on the season. Elwood City, who's been not a surprise because they were ramping up last year,
right.
But the Wolverines continue to have a good campaign so far here in 2024. They're 4-0 as well, number 2 in the HSSN top 5 in Class 2A. South Park 4-1, South Allegheny 4-1, maybe a little bit of a surprise there, and Steel Valley 2-3, number 5 in Class 2A.
You don't sleep on the Ironmen. They've had a very confusing season. They're right. 2-3. They lost their opener, came back and spanked what was then number 1 Washington. Lost again. I think they lost to Clareton and Bishop Canevin in week 0 and week 1. Came back and won in week 3, and then or they lost in week 3 and then came back big and won a week ago. They are worth watching, even though that it's been kind of a crazy start. I think they're going to be the team to beat in their conference, even though South Park is off to a good start. You mentioned the Eagles, Gladiators as well. South Park, big win over South Allegheny last week. Elwood City and Seton LaSalle are two strong teams, and I expect them to go deep in the postseason as well. I had a chance to see the Rebels last week. Great combination of size and speed, really turning around. 2 years ago, they were winless. Now they're 4-0 and on top of the Century Conference.
Class 3A, Amani Christian 5-0, Dare Lakes 5-0, Central Valley. Got to see the Warriors last week at home in a shootout game. Well, boy, that was an interesting game last week as far as running goes with Beaver and Central Valley. Avonworth 2-2, and Beaver, the team I just talked about, the Bobcats 3-2 after losing that shootout at Central Valley last week. Don, who do you like in 3A so far?
Amani Christian was probably my team to beat. They're 2-0, tied with Deer Lakes, and on top of the Allegheny 7 Conference. They barely got out of last week's game against Highlands with a victory. So maybe we need to hold off on crowning the Saints as champions because there are other good teams. Elizabeth Ford, it's been a slow start, but they're probably the favorite in the Interstate Conference. You mentioned Central Valley. They got off to an 0-3 start. All 3 losses against ranked 4A teams. They're going to be fine. They have a big one coming up Friday at Avonworth. I think the winner of that game, even though North Catholic is 2-0 in conference play, the winner of Avonworth Central Valley is the team to beat in the Western Hills and maybe the team to beat in all 3A.
Class 4A, the Aliquippa Quips 2-1, still number 1 in Class 4A. They lose last week at Penn Hills. Number 2 is Montour, 4-0. Thomas Jefferson, 5-0. Number 3, Newcastle, 4-0. Number 4, and McKeesport, they're 1-4. They're number 5 in Class 4A, but much like what you were talking about with Central Valley, as far as their non-conference schedule goes, they had a brutal one that put them at that 1-4 record. And my Leopards are out. Bell Vernon 1-2. They will actually play Thomas Jefferson this week. That's another tough one for Matt Humbert and company on the road as they try to rebuild this year. But so far, the Quips still top 4A.
I think Bell Vernon's fine as far as the Big 7 or Big 6 conference now this year is concerned. But Thomas Jefferson is the team to beat, as has been the case the last 25 years in that conference. Greater Allegheny Conference, you mentioned McKeesport, probably the team to beat. Watch out for Mars as well. But the Greater Allegheny Conference, 4A is all starting conference play this week. So all 3 conferences, there have been no conference games. It's been all non-conference. The Greater Allegheny Conference, a combined 8-21 for those teams in non-conference games. There is not a winning team in the GAC. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Parkway Conference is loaded. Aliquippa is Aliquippa. They'll be fine. Montour is a very serious team to watch, probably maybe the biggest threat, along with TJ, to Aliquippa's crown. And I'm curious to see how Newcastle does, undefeated, but they are at Aliquippa on Friday.
Class 5A, Peters Township, 5-0, number 1. The defending champs. Pine Richland, 4-0. Upper St. Clair, 5-0, number 3. Number 4, Bethel Park, 5-0. I'll be at Bethel Park Friday night on the TribLive High School Sports Network with Sean Saputo and Greg Smith broadcasting their home game against the Moon Tigers. And then you have South Fayette, who is 5-0, number 5 in Class 5A. No doubt, Don, I think 5A is the strongest and best classification out of all 6.
Yeah, the 5A teams had great success this year in non-conference play, going up against not only 4A teams, but against 6A teams. They really wiped 6A up in the head-to-head competition in non-conference. As far as the conference is concerned, the Allegheny 6 teams beginning conference play coming up on Friday. There are going to be 2 outstanding matchups every Friday in this conference. Let's take Baldwin out of the picture. That's a team that's struggling. They're 0-5. So of the 5 teams, you'll see 2 of them, Moon, Bethel Park, South Fayette, Peters Township, Upper St. Clair. That's another big game coming up Friday. Upper St. Clair looking for program victory number 500, home to Peters Township. Of those 5 teams combined right now, they are 23-1. 23-1. 4 undefeated teams at 5-0 in St. Clair, Peters, South Fayette, and Bethel Park. It's incredible. These head-to-head matchups are going to be awesome to watch. A lot of the playoff teams that go deep are probably going to come from the Allegheny 6. Big East Conference, hard to gauge right now. Franklin Regional and Woodland Hills have had impressive victories. They sit atop the conference, but don't sleep on Latrobe. Don't sleep on Gateway. Don't sleep on Penn Trafford. And in the Northeast Conference, probably comes down to Pine Richland and Penn Hills, as usually it does. But watch out for North Hills. They're 4-1 overall, 1-1 in conference play.
So many good teams in Class 4, or excuse me, 5. Well, 4A too. We just talked about them a little bit ago, but 5A just loaded from top to bottom. And you mentioned so many different schools that could potentially be in the running to make an AccuSure run, or a championship run, I should say, in Class 5A as we go through the second half of the season. Finally, Don, Class 6A, probably going to be decided this week, right? North Allegheny, number 1, they're 5-0. They play Central Catholic, who's 3-2, and then you have the Big Macs, Cannon McMillan, 2-3 at number 3, Seneca Valley, 1-3 at number 4, and Norwin at 2-3. You guys at the TribLive High School Sports Network have to put these rankings together. After NA Central Catholic, you just roll a dice and try to figure out who you're going to plug in as other 3 spots?
Yeah, really, after tonight, the excitement is gone as far as 1 and 2. The Tigers and Vikings playing at Baldwin High School. That is for first place, with the loser probably finishing second. Barring catastrophic injuries to both these programs, they're that much better than the other 5 teams in Class 6A. And don't read too much into tonight's result either. Last year, Central Catholic beat North Allegheny to win the regular season title, and then North Allegheny beat Central Catholic in the 6A championship. Those 2 teams will likely meet again. But the other 5 teams, the battles for third place and fourth place are really the only exciting thing moving forward after this week in 6A. Seneca Valley and Cannon McMillan got a leg up. They're both 1-0. The rest of the teams are 0-2. But that doesn't mean that Mount Lebanon, Hempfield, and Norwin are eliminated. They need to start winning, or else it's going to be snooze fest, and Cannon Mac and Seneca Valley will grab spots 3 or 4. But those 3 teams, especially Norwin and Mount Lebanon, have a shot to come back and challenge for third or fourth place.
Should be an interesting stretch run. The official stretch run does not begin for a couple more weeks. Week 7, we like to call it the stretch run, 7,
Right.
8, and 9 to wrap things up. But that'll be just around the corner in just 2 more weeks. Hard to believe, but here we are, the end of September, last Friday night in September. You can catch all the great coverage on the TribLive High School Sports Network with Don Rebel. Don has his weekly podcast, The Rebel Yell, that he referenced a little bit ago, so make sure you check that out as well on Friday nights. Don, it's crazy how, and I know you guys are celebrating 25 years. We talked about that last month when you were on, but how much technology has changed. When I get in my car after I'm done doing a game on Friday night, I have my Bluetooth with my cell phone. I bring up the post-game show that you're doing on Facebook. I stream it through my radio, and it's like 20 years ago when I used to listen to you on all the different affiliates on my ride home. It's the same. In fact, the quality's better because it's the actual. It's not the AM radio quality. It's this type of quality, and I get to listen to all the recaps, all the scores, and get to listen to you as I drive back home each and every Friday night. It's good stuff. Make sure you check it out.
Look at you all fancy with all your technology jumping in the car.
How about that? I'm
just happy. I'm just happy when my car starts. That's a victory for me. I'm not worried about all that other stuff.
That's right. It only took me a couple years to figure out that I could stream the post-game show through my radio just via my phone on the Bluetooth. But good stuff, my friend. Don, always glad to have you on to talk Steelers and, of course, WPIL high school football as well.
My pleasure, Ed. I do appreciate the fact. I know that you and Brian have done a great job with this podcast. You get some big names on. It's almost like an off week when you ask me to come on. It's like, you're reaching the bottom of the barrel, and hopefully you can restart over with some of your big name guests. But I greatly appreciate it. Kudos to both of you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. We'll have Craig Wolfley on next week of the Steelers Audio Network to talk Steelers with us. And a couple programming notes. Friday night, live from Bethel Park, we'll have Friday Night Lights, the WPIL preview show from Bethel Park High School. Sean Saputo, Greg Smith will join me on the field for that. And then Sunday after the Steeler game, we will have the Steeler post-game show as we recap the Colts and the Steelers on Sunday.
Tell Craig Wolfley I said hello, and remind him who got him his start in this business. That's all I'm going to say.
I will definitely do that, Don, for sure. We will definitely do that. That'll be next week here on the Three Rivers Podcast. For Don Rebel, Ed Troop signing off for now. Have a great week, everyone.